Well, today we're coming around third, heading for home on our series on heroic women of the Bible. I've really enjoyed this. I hope and I believe, at least as I read the Bible, I've saved the best to last on this, because there are many great stories. These women, the heroes of the Bible, many of them spoke to power. You remember we started out with two women named Pua and Shiphrah. Names that you probably would never name your children, but they went right to King Pharaoh and said, "We will not kill and throw babies in the Nile." They refused. They refused to do it. And then there was Jochebed, who had a great plan to save Moses. There was a military hero, Deborah. You remember the story of Deborah? And she was able to be in a role that was usually reserved for men, but she did a phenomenal job in saving Israel. Last week we talked about Esther, who became a queen and was able to go to the king and save the Jewish people from destruction, a wicked plan from King Xerxes and Haman. Today, Ruth, she didn't speak to power at all. In fact, she's not a queen, really wasn't known for anything like that. Really, the only thing that we know about Ruth is that we get introduced to her by her mother-in-law, of all people, and her name is Naomi. Now, everybody say with me, Naomi, so we got that name. Now, Ruth and Naomi are pretty good names. In fact, here recently, more and more people of Naomi used to be kind of an old name, but now parents are naming their kids Naomi again. And Ruth, I think, is even making kind of a slow comeback on names. You know how names come and go, and unless you have a name like mine, it never comes in style and it never goes out. You know, it just is just there. But anyway, here, everybody say Naomi with me. 1, 2, 3, Naomi. And Naomi actually had a meaning. Naomi meant pleasant one. So can you imagine naming a child Pleasant One? That was her name. That she was pleasant. She was a joy bell. Wherever Naomi would go, she would ring in joy. But that was about to change because of seasons in her life. There was a man, his name was Solomon. Solomon wrote about seasons in life, and he said we all go through seasons, and life has its seasons that we go through. He was, allegedly, I guess, the wisest man in the world. Sometimes you look at his life and you wonder, but his teachings are very wise. He wrote Ecclesiastes, and he wrote Proverbs and Song of Solomon as well. But there's one section in Ecclesiastes that he writes about these seasons that we have. He says, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest. There's a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance. Now remember the woman I just told you about, her name meant pleasant one. Does anybody here remember her name? Her name was Naomi. It meant pleasant one. And we actually get introduced to Ruth through this woman whose name is Pleasant One, or Naomi. Now, Naomi is going through a series in her life where there are, well, as I just read there in Ecclesiastes, she's seeing just the one side. There's a time to die. There's a time to be killed. There's a time to tear down. There's a time to cry. And there's a time to grieve. And she's not seeing the balance of it. And there's so much negativity and difficulty and struggle that's coming into Naomi's life that she actually chooses to camp out in self-pity, which is why today we are not studying and reading about Naomi. Naomi is important to us because Naomi introduces us to Ruth. Has everybody got it so far? Because even though her name was Pleasant One, her life was anything but pleasant. Let me tell you what happened. In the years that they were growing up in Bethlehem of Judea, probably about 1,000 years before Jesus, or roughly 3,000 years from where we stand right now, their life was going pretty good, but it took an economic downturn. I don't know, her husband got a pink slip, whatever happened. He decided that he would need to relocate for purposes of wealth. We read nothing of whether her husband, his name was Elkanah, whether he prayed or sought the Lord or anything like that. They just picked up and moved. They didn't just move to another town, they moved to another country. They went to a place called Moab, outside of where Jerusalem. They had a different language, a different culture. Another thing, in Moab, they did not particularly like Jews. That was pretty true in the whole area there, and there's a long history for all of that I won't go into. So at any rate, she leaves there, and if that's not bad enough, she's trying to make the most of it. She has two sons. One's named Mahlon, the other one's named Kilian, And she's hoping upon hope that her sons, like all Jewish boys, would meet good Jewish women. She didn't want them to marry outside the faith, in other words. And if you're a parent and you're a believer, you know that you'd love for your kids to marry inside the faith, because it's really, really hard for it to go the one way. Usually the parent that's, or the spouse that's a non-believer usually drags down the one who's a believer. So she didn't want that, but as it worked out, they both named or married Moabite women. One of those was a girl by the name of Ruth, and the other one was a woman you all know, and her name was Oprah. You know Oprah? Actually, her name was Orpah, but I think somebody misread it and called her Oprah. So anyway, Oprah. And their sons married these women, and that just stung her deeply. Well, it doesn't end there. A little while later, her husband, Elimelech, dies. Ooh, tough, tough, tough. But to add insult to injury, Naomi loses her two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. It's not supposed to happen like that. And so now, she got nothing. I mean, she has gone through life. She's realized, I've left everything I loved in my great Bethlehem where we lived. I've left my culture. I left my family. I'm here in this God-forsaken place of Moab. And she looks off to Bethlehem and she says, I know what I'll do. I will return to Bethlehem and I'll become a beggar. But she's miserable. Here's why. And who could blame her? The seasons of life have been so difficult on Naomi that going along Pleasant Highway, walking with the Lord, she pulls into Camp Self-Pity, where everything is horizontal. And the only vertical you ever get is you point the finger at God and you say, God, why did you make my life so miserable? Let me read you the story. We pick it up in verse 8, chapter 1, the book of Ruth. And we got to talk a little about Naomi because we got to get to Ruth. And you'll see a little bit what makes Ruth so special. Everybody ready? Here we go. We're going to read it. But on the way, Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with security of another marriage. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. I mean, Orpah and Ruth loved their mother-in-law. Now, let me just see your hands. How many of you here have a mother-in-law? Everybody, anybody, or you've ever had a mother-in-law? Good, okay, put your hands down. How many of you just love your, don't answer that, just love your mother-in-law. You say, I love my mother-in-law. Good for you, all two of you. They love their mother-in-law, kind of unusual, but they just loved her dearly. No, they said, we're going to go with you to your people. But Naomi replied, why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. Well, there's one strike of good old Camp Self-Pity. I'm getting old. Life ain't so much fun for me anymore. I'm getting too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up so they'd be 18? You'd probably be 45. They refuse to marry someone else? Of course not. My daughters, things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself, get this, has raised his fist against me. Number one, I'm getting old. And number two is, I can't figure out why I am being so cursed by God. And again, they wept together. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye and went on her way. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. Look, Naomi said to her, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same. But Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I'm going to go. Wherever you live, I'm going to live. Your God is going to be my God. Wherever you die, there I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me ever so severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. This is her mother-in-law. When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more Underline that. It's going to be very important here in just a minute. She didn't say anything. So the two of them continued on their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is it really Naomi? The women asked. Now watch. Naomi says, don't call me Naomi. Don't call me pleasant one, she says. Instead, call me Mara, which means bitter one. For the Almighty has made my life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me? So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest. Naomi, for whatever reasons, and you can understand the reasons, living in a foreign country, lost her husband, lost her 2 sons. In her mind, I got absolutely nothing. And she is in Camp Self-Pity. You know Camp Self-Pity. That's where you go in and you sit around a campfire and you sing those favorite Camp Pity songs, you know, like, nobody knows the trouble I see, nobody knows but Jesus. It's getting bad, it will get worse. I'm getting old and God has frowned on me. Yeah, Camp Self-Pity. Here's the thing. In Camp Self-Pity, you never can see the blessings. Did you catch that? Did you catch that there is at least one blessing that Ruth has, and she's missed it completely because all that she's doing is whining and complaining over how bad it's been. Do you know what that blessing was? She has a daughter-in-law who says, you are stuck with me. And no matter where you go, I will be there for you. And no matter what you do, I'm going to be there for you. I will not leave you. I will not forsake you. You are stuck with me. And where's Naomi? Shouldn't she have at least said, when she went back to Jerusalem or to Judea, Bethlehem, where they lived, shouldn't she at least said, you know what? Life has been tough, but I have my daughter-in-law, Ruth, here. She is remarkable. Thank God for Ruth. No, in fact, when Ruth says, I'm going with you, what's Naomi do? She doesn't say anything. She doesn't even say thank you. She's so stuck in Camp Self-Pity that she can't even see the great blessing that God has given her, which is what happens to you and me when you and I get stuck in Camp Self-Pity. It all just becomes about misery and difficulty and struggle and hurt. Reminds me of a story I read when I was a kid. I used to read Zane Grey novels. Zane Grey, I don't know, people don't read them much anymore. Back in the day when I was a kid, we only had 3 TV stations, so for entertainment, we didn't have a whole lot. There was no internet, anything like that. So what we did for entertainment, we read books, which is kind of a crazy thing to do for entertainment, but probably a good thing. I learned a lot from reading these novels. Great challenges and heroes and heroines and all of this stuff. But there was a story about this old guy who was out in western Nebraska. He'd settled some land out there. He'd married the love of his life. Oh, he loved that woman. He loved her so much. They were very excited when the first child was coming along. They were so excited, and it was going to be a girl. Well, they didn't know that it was going to be a girl, but it was a girl when it was born. Unfortunately, through the birth of this child, the woman they loved died. And so this man, this farmer, this man, a homesteader in western Nebraska, bore his daughter a grudge. He looked at her and he looked at God and he said, God, she's the one who killed my darling wife. And so for the rest of her days, at least growing up days, this farmer was really, really mean to his daughter. And his daughter loved him. She loved him. She would do anything for him. She'd cook pancakes and make the fire in the morning over a stove and have it all ready to go. And he'd eat the pancakes. "Oh, these pancakes are too runny." And then she'd try to do better. "This pancake's burnt." She'd make bacon for him. "Oh, you didn't trim enough fat off of the bacon." She could never do anything right, and yet she tried with every ounce of strength that she had, year after year after year after year. 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, she loved her dad, never spoke ill of him, but all that her dad would give her were curses and remarks and problems with who she was and what she'd done and how miserable he was in his life with her. And yet the daughter continually looked after him. One day there was a group that came in that were thrashing, and there was a young man that was thrashing with the thrashers who'd come to the farmer's land, and he noticed this young girl over there, and she was very, very beautiful. He noticed how she waited hand and foot on this old, cranky man who lived in Camp Self-Pity. She caught his eye, and you know how it was. A little secret romance started to come. And one day he realized he's going to have to go and ask the old man for her hand in marriage. So there he went in one day, and he says, "You know what? I fallen in love with your daughter. She loves me too, and we want to get married." The guy who's asking for the hand in marriage thought the old man was going to pull out his gun and shoot him. Didn't happen that way. Zane Grey writes the novel. He says the old man fell to his knee, and suddenly he started rehearsing in his mind the days when he asked his wife's father for her hand in marriage. And for the first time since his daughter had been alive, which is now over 20 years, he began to be grateful for the daughter that he had and all the blessings that he had forgotten. And he wept bitterly, and he said to the boy, he says, "Yes, you can have my daughter. She has been so good to me." And he went out, and for the first time, he put his arms around her, and he blessed her. And on that day, the man, for the first time in over 20 years, got out of Camp Self-Pity and started to count his blessings. That couple went on to have 12 kids. And they took on the farm into the next generations. He was a blessed man. He just missed the blessing that was right in front of him. Whenever you choose to get into Camp Self-Pity, I don't know what the circumstances are, but whenever you choose to get into it, let me tell you this, the ticket out is start to count your blessings. You will not stay in Camp Pity long if you just start to have, I got one blessing, and you make that move to get out of Camp Self-Pity. And when you start to look up and you say, "God, today I choose to count my blessings," you will find that the hand of the Almighty will come down and it will grab your hand, and you'll start to walk on pleasant highway again. I don't care how tough it is. It's tough for Naomi. But she missed the significant blessing that was right in front of her. Her daughter-in-law was stuck with her permanently, and she couldn't even say, "I'm thankful to you, God, for my daughter-in-law." She was stuck in Camp Self-Pity. Oh, ain't it awful? 2 sons died. My husband died. And I mean, who would blame her? The devil just loves to camp out in self-camp pity. And he loves to just take you down and take you out and compare you to everybody else who has it so much better than you do. At least you think so. But that's a lie from hell. Because there's a lot of people who have it a whole lot worse than you do. It's just that they found that by counting their blessings, they're getting out of Camp Self-Pity. Start to count your blessings. You can't be pity, or you can't have self-pity and have gratitude to God. It just doesn't work. Well, you can imagine. Naomi, she's becoming a bitter, old, cranky person. She wasn't that way from the beginning. She was the pleasant one. Ruth had seen something in her that drew her to her. In fact, that probably it was Naomi who allowed for Ruth to have faith. And Ruth says, no, I'm not leaving. I'm not going back to Moab to get the easy life, to find another man so I can get married and have kids. No. I'm sticking with you, Naomi, because I know down deep somewhere in you is the real pleasant Naomi. Let me read that again because I just read this. But Ruth replied, do not ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God's going to be my God. Wherever you die, I will die. And I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. And then when Naomi saw what Ruth had done, she didn't say anything. Boy, would that have been an opportunity for Naomi to put out her arms and say, thank you, Ruth, I love you. I have at least one blessing, and it's you, Ruth. But she didn't get there, not right away anyway. Eventually she will. And she got there because Ruth is a hero. Ruth's loyalty to her mother-in-law is completely unmerited. You guys all know that there's any number of mother-in-law jokes that you can tell. And you realize I never tell them here because my mother-in-law watches me every Sunday. And Mom, if you're on that camera right there, I love you dearly. I really do. And I do. I really love her. She's different and unique. And every time she comes, when she leaves, I always tell her the same thing. I say, come back when you can't stay so long. No, I'm kidding, Mom. I didn't mean that. I just, come on anytime. We'd love to have you. You're welcome. We got a place in the basement for you if you ever want to live with us. I mean that too. Well, I do love her. You know why I love her so much? She raised my wife. She did a good job. Well, this story is getting interesting now. And here's what I want you to make sure you get this. Ruth doesn't owe her mother-in-law anything, and this is grace. You see, grace comes to us. We don't deserve what God does for us, but grace comes to us. It's unmerited. We get God's grace. That's his love. That's his mercy. We don't earn it. We don't all of a sudden say, hey, God, I'll be a lot happier now give me your grace. No, God says, I will give you my grace. I'll give it to you right now. It's unmerited. We don't earn it. We don't gain it. He just gives it. Ruth came to Naomi, and she gives her grace, unmerited to her. She didn't probably enjoy being around a bitter old cranky woman named Mara. Call me bitter. Don't call me Naomi because I'm bitter. God's brought all my problems. And Ruth is wondering, where did that sweet, innocent, loving joy bell of a woman ever go? Now get this. Whenever you choose to bless somebody else, God will bless you. You want to get out of camp self-pity? 2 ways. Number 1, start counting your blessings. Number 2, instead of being focused on all you and all the problems you got, start to look out to others because God never wastes a hurt. Here's the deal, and here's what I know. You go through things in life. I go through things in life. All God's children go through things in life. But when you go through things, you go through them so that you can help somebody with the comfort that you got from God so that you are now able to help them. You get out of camp self-pity by focusing on others instead of on me. That's what Ruth wants us to know. Ruth is so focused on her mother-in-law that she's not even concerned about her own feelings, her own thoughts. She says, mother-in-law, Naomi, I love you, and you are stuck with me for the rest of your life. Now watch the blessing that comes. Because Ruth goes out as poor people would. She goes behind the folks who are cleaning up the fields, and they would always leave just a little bit of the leftovers on the field. So Ruth's going out to pick up the leftover barley so she can go home and make flour and make bread so that her mother-in-law and her don't starve. Naomi's probably too old to do it, but she's there, and all of a sudden there is a guy there that takes notice of Ruth. And it just so happens, in case you're interested, this guy is wealthy, this guy is influential, and this guy is good looking. He is Boaz. Does God do things right or what? he notices this woman. I haven't seen her before. Working in my field over here, is she? And he noticed she's coming back and she's getting all the leftovers. And he wonders, who is that? And let's read the story here of how it works. You see, remember, Ruth is working hard. She's working hard to provide for her mother-in-law. She's not interested in anything else, any distractions at all. But Boaz, that was the guy's name, he went over and said to Ruth, after he found out who she was, he says, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather the grain. Don't go to any other field. Stay right behind the young women who are my employees. So that, in other words, what he said, you'll get the best of the grain. You won't have to pick up the scraps. See which part of the field they're harvesting and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly, which is good because those harvesters were a pretty rough bunch. It's kind of like a gal walking past a construction site. He says, nobody's going to say anything against you. No, sir. And what's more, he says, and when you are thirsty, you can keep and help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well. Ruth fell at Boaz's feet. She thanked him warmly. What have I done to deserve such kindness, she asked. I am only a foreigner. Watch how Boaz answers. He doesn't just say, yeah, baby, that's because you're a hot mama and I'm a hot dude, man. Let's get together. He goes right to her character. Watch. Yes, Boaz replied. I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done. Ruth replies, I hope to continue to please you, sir. You have comforted me by speaking so kindly to me, even though I am not one of your workers. Did you catch the blessing that's coming upon Ruth? If she'd stayed in Moab, you'd have never heard of her. But she goes with her mother-in-law, and the dude who is the wealthy, handsome, influential Boaz says, there is a woman of genuine character. And he's attracted to her. I remember, well, it was cold, so it was probably February or March. I was standing down in the west part of the where our rainforest is, where you enter. Some of you come through that way, you know right where I was standing. There was a young couple. Their names were Donnie and Tiffany, and they were heading to the Cleveland Clinic on a snowy, cold morning. They come to church, complications had happened while they were in church, and they called the doctor while they were in the lobby. The doctor says, get him up here right away. Donnie was about to go through, I don't know, umpteenth number of surgeries that had come because it wasn't healing right. I remember as I kind of gathered them and we prayed, and I remember this smile that was on Tiffany's face that I saw in her. I saw strength. I saw courage. I saw loyalty. And as they walked out that door that day, I said, God, give me just a little bit more of what those folks have. I could tell you their story, but it'd be a whole lot better if they told you. In fact, it just so happens I've got a video here in which they tell their story. And here's the story of Donnie and Tiffany Heatherly and what they've been through and the numbers of surgery. But I want you to see why Tiffany qualifies as a hero is because if there was somebody who should have gone into Camp Pity, she should have been there and never got out. But listen to their story. And remember, when you stay loyal with courage and strength to somebody else, God has plenty of blessing for you. The tape you're about to see is a blessing. Let's go ahead and roll the tape.
When we found out about Donnie's tumor growing back the second time, we were actually at a doctor's appointment for our daughter, and we just kind of hit the floor. And we called a family meeting right away, and his parents came, and we told them, and you just feel alone again. Like, why is this happening? But each time we get through it, so it's a long process. I'm Tiffany Heverly, this is my husband Donnie Heverly, and this is our story. The day we found out about Donnie's diagnosis was actually Halloween of 2013, and he was just really sick, so we took him into the ER, and the doctors had confirmed that it was a tangerine-sized tumor on his right frontal lobe and that they needed to operate it immediately. They were actually amazed that Donnie was coherent and able to function. I felt alone because I was the only one there. We had no family members. We were in DC. So the people that I needed to be there weren't. They were about 5-6 hours away. I also felt kind of suffocated because at the time that I felt alone, I had all of these military people surrounding me, sergeants, captains, colonels, just asking me what I need, and I didn't know what I needed at the time. I just needed my family. When I feel like I hit rock bottom was when everything happened with Donnie, and then the one person that always lifted me up was my father-in-law, Ray, and in 2016 he passed away unexpectedly. And it was a low moment, and I hit rock bottom because he was the one that always said everything was going to be okay, even though he himself knew, and he was scared.
Through the past 5 years, Tiffany has grown much more. She had to put her tool belt down. She couldn't fix it herself. Through God's grace and through praying, we've gone through the past 5 surgeries, and she depends on Him. She leans on God, and we were gonna make it through. Tiffany is very, very strong. It's one of her best attributes. She's my hero.
I would say that my faith grew the most when it first happened. I realized that I need Jesus and I have to lean on Him. Getting in the car to drive to the hospital, I sat there and prayed, which I hadn't done in a very long time, just so everything would be okay. Looking back, I should have trusted Him more and leaned on Him more. It takes me a while to realize these things, but I found out that it's His story, His plan. I'm just along for the ride.
Having Tiff through all these 5 surgeries has meant absolutely everything. If the roles were reversed and Tiff was in that bed, it'd be so hard. She is so amazingly strong.
As of now, I am truly ready to tackle on anything in the near future. I figured with all that I've had handled, there's nothing that can stop me, and I truly have God on my side, so I'm ready.
Wow. That pull that the enemy comes, it wants to pull us into self-pity. Feel sorry. Why me? Why God do all of this to me? We lose out, and there in the midst of it, the blessings of God. If she was able to see, and the blessings for others. Well, that's Ruth's story. Ruth was able to see this, and she was able to help her mother-in-law, Naomi, see this. And here's the third and final point, and that is that seasons come and go, but God's people win in the end. Now, I want you to say that last part with me. Seasons come and go. They do for all of us. I mean, difficult seasons come. It's been promised in the Bible that there's going to be our share of death that we're going to have to handle, our share of trouble, our share of difficulty. Everybody's going to have to deal with that. Seasons will come and go in life. That's just a fact. You might as well just write it down. I'm going to deal with some difficult seasons. But you don't have to go to camp self-pity, because God's people win in the end. So I'm going to say the first part of that comma, then you say the rest of it. Everybody ready? Seasons come and go. Do you know that? They do. Oh, they do. God's faithful people. Let me read for you the end of the story of Ruth. You probably have already predicted it. This is better than a Hallmark movie, folks. Yeah, they're all the same. So Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women of town said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who has now provided a redeemer." There was somebody who would help you for your family. May this child be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth. May you grow younger, Naomi, because of this child, and care for you in your old age, for he is the son of your daughter-in-law who loves you, and catch this, and has been better for you, or better to you, than 7 sons. One daughter-in-law who's a hero, better than 7 sons. Naomi took the baby and cuddled him to her breast, and she cared for him as if he were her own. The neighbor women said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again," and they named him Obed. Catch this. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David, who became the greatest king in the history of Israel. There's Ruth, who becomes the great-grandmother of King David. Story doesn't end there. Of all the other women that we've talked about, none of them make the New Testament, except this one. And when you open up the first book in the New Testament called Matthew, and you go to chapter 1, you read a whole list of men, because it was a patriarchal society. It goes something like Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, thigh bone connected to the hip bone connected to the backbone. Jacob begat Judah, and Judah begat, and so on and so forth. But you read through there, you'll hear 4 women, one of them Ruth, who was in the lineage of Jesus. If Naomi had been able to convince Ruth not to hang out with a bitter old cranky woman, if she had refused and gone back home and taken the easy road, you'd have never heard of her. But that woman saw the blessings, stuck it out, phenomenally blessed of God. How you doing on these matters? How are you? The devil easily pull you into horizontal worldview. Look at them, and look at them, and look at them, and look at him, and what's up with that, and why them, and him, no. Why not? Why not stop the nonsense and say, today, God, I have been blessed, and from this day, for the rest of my life, God, I'm going to count blessings. Even in those seasons that I don't understand all that you're up to, I'm going to start to count blessings. And God, I'm going to realize that even in the hurts that I have, you never waste a hurt, but you use those hurts in my life to help others who are hurting similarly. Let's bow our heads.